sales or outside of sales. So, um, recording has started, so we're good. All right, perfect. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to continue with our discussion of negotiation in this class in this week. Last week, if you remember, we started um, with some of obviously the importance of negotiating, and this week we're going to really focus in on um, working through that. In the past, we've talked about handling objections. And if you remember, while we're negotiating, you're going to be hit with a lot of objections. And if we do a good job of being able to work with those as they're presented and handle those in particular ways, which we talked about in previous classes, we'll have a better chance of getting a good negotiation going on. And again, if you think about it, it's not just for sales, but we're negotiating the price of a car. We're negotiating perhaps with somebody that we're, at a store, negotiating with a boss. Maybe we want a raise. Maybe we want more help negotiating with our kids, our family members. So there's always um, an activity that we're doing each day, unless we're like on vacation. And even when we're on vacation, we're probably still negotiating with something. You're at the hotel, you want a better room. You want a room closer to the exit. You want a room further away from the elevator. All those are negotiations, even though we're asking for something. It's how do we, and we'll talk about this here, how do we open a negotiation? And part of it is knowing who you're talking with to have a idea of how to open. So with a negotiation, there's always an opening. And sometimes the other person opens, and sometimes if you are the seller, you're opening. But a buyer could make an opening in a negotiation by giving you their budget and say, this is all the money I have to work with. So what are we going to be able to do about that? So they kind of set the table. But you can do the same. And we'll talk about how to best open. And it will vary based on who we're talking to and if it's a long term customer, if it's somebody new, if it's a tense negotiation, if it's about a lot of money, if it has high risk for both parties. We'll talk about that. So just kind of think about as we're opening, our initial proposal should reflect higher expectations. So as you're thinking in your head, meaning that, okay, I'm negotiating a price on they're going to come back on my software. And I know I have my company needs to have at least $20,000 for the opening um, basic package of software and service. So I know that. Okay. But that doesn't mean that that's all I want to get. Maybe when they come and say, how much is your service? And we go through the things, I say it's $22,000, for the per year. And so starting a little higher, noticing that I have more leeway. Of course, the buyer will probably have a mindset to think that maybe you're doing that as well. You know, you're buying a car. Think about this. You're buying a car. Do we pay sticker price? Well, I think usually we don't. I mean, nowadays, I think used cars prices were very high. They've come down a little bit, and regular cars have come down a little bit when the supply has gotten a little bit better. But for a while, people were paying a lot more money than what was on the sticker price. So that was just a starting point. And the other thing, we talk about this throughout our course here about being prepared. So you want to be supported by having lots of solid information, accurate information. The more information you have that's accurate, the better, right? Just to have a bunch of information can kind of cloud your mind, but having accurate information about what you'll accept, what your company, what your bosses, remember we talked about the objectives, right? And this is the objectives in a negotiation. But you also have, okay, what is it that I want in this negotiation? So you're thinking about like a sales call, we have objectives, right? And you may have objectives, and your boss might have objectives, which kind of overlay on yours, and your company might have policies and objectives that kind of overlay on all that. And then there's even a larger thing, maybe the government or the country that you're at has certain ways that we have to deal with things too. Um, so sometimes when we'll talk about this negotiating in teams, that's a little different, right? When you have a partner or you have a group that you are presenting from and to. But what we should do is obviously we're trying to think about, as a good salesperson, as a good negotiator, what potentially could arise before I get into negotiation. So you kind of think, if you know the party a little bit, maybe you already have dealt with them in the past, maybe you know their personality style, and you kind of know, well, maybe when they counter, they always seem to talk about extra things they want in terms of the service. Maybe that's most important. And so you kind of say, okay, they're going to try to negotiate a longer service agreement or better pricing on the service agreement or more functionality, maybe additional hours or additional support. So we always have to kind of think about doing our homework ahead of time, being prepared. And that's one of the keys with negotiation. So how much can we prepare? As much as we possibly can never be too prepared for negotiation. Um, let's talk about this. And I kind of alluded to it a few moments ago, right? As the buyer and the seller are in positions, and this is like we'll talk about price here, negotiating price, because it's a big part of negotiation um, in selling, is that we come from a different place. Buyers obviously want to get, you know, the best deal, and sellers want to get the most revenue possible, right? Long term. And so those are two opposite kinds of mindsets, right? So there's this, we talk about win-win, right? In terms of, we talked about that last week, the win-win situation where both feel they've gotten a good deal, right? And that doesn't always mean that the buyer is going to be able to negotiate and get price concessions from you, but there's other pieces that they might be able to get, right? So this is a little bit about price. So just kind of think about, as you're selling or as you're even going into a negotiation yourself, um, buying a car or buying something where you can negotiate price, what's the minimum price that you think they'll accept, right? And as the buyer, I can have what is the maximum price that I'm going to pay, right? Remember when I said we're talking about objections, and that buyer might only have a budget of X amount of dollars, that you hopefully have done good questioning to find that out ahead of time. So you're not blindsided with the price of your product or service, and then they say, you know what, this is all we have. Um, so we kind of have to think about, again, this is work ahead of time. You're just trying to position yourself and know what are your limits, what are your parameters, okay? And so, we talk about adaptive selling, right? The adaptive, changing our behavior to mirror the other person, being able to change, not necessarily change our personality style, but be able to kind of morph and adjust how we sell. Like if we're dealing with a driver, facts. They don't want to spend a lot of time in the negotiation. They want all the information ahead and right out in front. An amiable or an expressive, well, they don't want to rush through the decision and the negotiation. So you might have a longer drawn out negotiation because they're not willing to take as much risk as a driver. A driver, or perhaps the analytical, when they get all the data, they'll take the risk more than the expressive will. So because of their positioning, a driver or an analytical, it might be a faster negotiation since they're more willing to take a risk. If you're the seller and you're not willing to take very much risk, then it's going to be a very hard negotiation for you. Okay. Because then you'll probably not be able to adapt very well. And in fact, you might adapt way too much, meaning that they'll say, uh, can you lower the price? You give them a new price and they balk at that. They're like, that's way too high still. And you keep moving your price down because you think you can't get the business unless you lower it because they're, giving you objections. And so you kind of have to think about that. So what do you want to, have these different ways to deal with people, and then kind of, ahead of time, if there are people that you can go to before and just kind of brainstorm. What do you think, boss? What do you think, colleague? What do you think, um, somebody, a relative, somebody that you know? Do you think that would be helpful? Maybe they'll give you some new ideas about how that other person might think about your offer. So let's talk a little bit about advantages and disadvantages of working in teams. Okay. And far as, there could be a team of parents, a mom and a dad, a grandma and a mom or something like that, trying to influence a child. That's a team, right? It could be you're interviewing and there's three people and they've agreed to hire you, but now you're negotiating terms, right? And so let's talk about the advantage and disadvantage of teams on both sides. So obviously, when you have teams, there's more people, so there's more creativity, usually, right? Because one individual has an idea, five individuals have five different ideas. And so you might get, again, a variety of backgrounds, a variety of knowledge base ahead of time. That could be helpful. Um, and certainly, the more people you have to a point on the team that is making the negotiation, they'll help cover for you. So you might not know something, but they can pick up the slack. You might be on a team where you're a little bit more less of a risk taker and you're not willing to negotiate the price, like move it down because you're like, oh, I, can't do that. But somebody on your team might be willing to do that if the quantity goes way up. They might be willing to lower the price if they can buy more. Or, if it's a long-term agreement for, say, consulting or software, you can extend, okay, we'll give you this price, but you have to, come to us for 2 years, not just 1 year. So get some thinking. And that's a risk for them. And if you're able to negotiate that, it helps to have other people that are supporting you. What are some of the disadvantages? And think about this. Obviously, the more people, sometimes it takes more time to reach an agreement on both sides, right? So if the buyers have multiple people and the sellers have multiple people, I could think of like attorneys and settlements, right? That's negotiation. There's two sides of attorneys. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's two companies that are in litigation and they're kind of going back and forth. There's five on each side. It's going to take longer to get an agreement because there's always going to be somebody that says, you know what, I don't like that. And then you have to come back. And obviously then,
Professor Tad, I have a
yeah,
question.
yeah, sure.
Regarding the negotiation, it should be written or it can be verbal.
So it depends. Sometimes they're both. Okay, so it's not generally just one or the other. Many times it's both, because many times it's you're negotiating um, live, verbally, and then once all the terms are mostly agreed upon, like you have a proposal, and then you write it down, and they look at it and they say, you know what, this is still not good. You have to come back. So sometimes it's just verbal, right? But if you're going and you're, having a long-term relationship with somebody and it's more of a, a big ticket item, more than $100 of some kind, hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions with big companies, you're going to have it written and you're going to have it spoken. And sometimes what you want to do is make sure that you, before you have a written proposal, that you have information ahead of time about how to structure things, because it's very hard to put stuff on paper unless it's ranges of dollars and ranges of service, um, until you have an idea what they're willing to offer. So that's a good question, but I think a lot of negotiations, small ticket items, small dollars, it's probably mostly just done verbally. But when the price is higher and there's longer term, then you'll have probably a combination. Okay.
Thank you,
Let's talk.
Prof.
Oh, you're welcome, Julian. My pleasure. Um, let's talk a little bit about, and this is important, selecting people to negotiate. When you have the choice and you're able to choose people on your team, it's important to kind of think about, okay, what is the optimal size of people I want in my team? It could be two, it could be three. Again, right, if you have too many, it becomes difficult to gain consensus and it might take too long. You might only just be yourself, right? I know being in sales, as when I've been in sales for a while, when there's larger value being offered, it's usually going to be myself as a salesperson and my boss, and sometimes even a third person like their boss. And because then they have more experience usually, and they're able maybe then to make a concession in the negotiation that I don't have the authority to, because I'm lower on the company ladder than they are. And they probably already have pieces and parts that they've dealt with that they know. Um, and to just kind of think about this, this is pretty intuitive. It's kind of makes sense here that people on the teams everybody should have a defined role, right? You should have somebody that is more going to open the negotiation. You have somebody that is more going to take the questions per se, like if there's difficult things that have to be negotiated, they'll negotiate some of those pieces. You should have somebody be able to summarize. If there's only one or two people, then you divvy that up. But if there's four people, you don't want, if you have four people in the negotiation, you don't want three of the people doing all the talking, one person just kind of doing nothing, because that's kind of awkward. So everybody should have something to do, even if it's somebody's just taking notes, right? Um, and kind of think about this. Team members should possess the traits of good negotiators, right? If you're selecting your team, again, it's helpful to have somebody that's willing to take more risk, as we talked about that. Because if you have all people on negotiation, then they're not willing to take much of a risk. It's not going to be a very good negotiation. It might be very short and you might not get anything done because nobody's willing to figure out, well, risk reward, right? Um, and kind of think about this when you're in negotiation with your team, and you've probably seen this on, and if you watch like court cases or legal, there's always the attorney and the client, and they're together, and then the defendant or the prosecutor, there's the defendant, and there's always multiple people. And so they have a way that they look at each other, non-verbally or verbally, to kind of signal that, okay, I don't like that. Need to ask more questions, or that's good, or let's keep going, or I'm willing to, you know, concede on that point, right? So ahead of time, we need to kind of think about that. As we define roles, we should also define, okay, what are our signals, right? And think about this. This is kind of funny, but this is true. You're going to a party with some friends, and it's a party that you're not sure if it's going to be a good party. Between the friends, again, a group, you're kind of negotiating, well, who's going to be the bad one? to tell us we have to go. If it's a boring party, somebody's going to need to help us out and figure that out. And so, what's the, I'll throw this word out, excuse that we're going to use ahead of time that we got to go, right? And who's going to give me the signal? Or, somebody comes over to talk to you and you don't want to be talking to them. They're trying to, flirt or something. And you're like a signal to your friends to come over at that time to like save me, right? Um, that's true. And that happens in the way in a negotiation. Nonverbals are very important. And we're also looking, obviously, the buyers and the sellers, if the teams on both sides, they have people in that way too. Maybe you can pick up signals from other people as well, reading the nonverbals, reading what they're, if they're happy or, they're just trying to stall. And again, practice, right? We should practice ahead of time, just kind of thinking through this. And that is one of the keys in a good negotiation. Write down. Think about what they're going to propose, the other side. Think about what they're going to object to. Think about your limits on what you're going to take and what you'll be willing to give. And you don't have to have it all done ahead of time, because some things are going to come up in a negotiation where you're just not prepared for it. That's okay. That happens. And that's when you're like, having more information will be helpful, because then it gives you a chance, like, you know what, you brought that issue up. It could be where, you have to go back to your team and, okay, let's take a break. It's like a sports team taking a timeout and they're going back in the huddle to talk about what's going on. Well, here's the defense. I'm seeing what the defense is doing. I need to take a timeout because I wasn't prepared for that, right? Same thing in sales and a negotiation. If you see something happening you're not prepared for, well, maybe you need to figure out a way to take a timeout, or at least, okay, let's take a break. I need to talk with my team, and we'll come back and be able to address that. And some negotiations that happens. They tell people you can go off on for a few minutes and meet on your own, and then you come back. That happens a lot, right? So just kind of think about that. And so this is where it becomes interesting, right? And I started talking about this a little bit ago. Behavior patterns. So think about every negotiation. There's a leader, right? Somebody that's you can kind of tell, as if the buyer has a group, if the seller has a group, or if you just negotiate and beyond sales, somebody's a leader, and so somebody, figure out who that person is, and you kind of like then, okay, ahead of time, again, who are the people that we're negotiating with? What are their personality styles? How do they respond? You might not know ahead of time, but you can kind of think about some of the characteristics. They keep asking about specifics in terms of price and reliability and quality, and they're just hammering on details of analytics. Well, then they're probably more analytical, or maybe they're a driver. If they're kind of like sitting back and just kind of jovial and just talking about, as the negotiations going on, they're talking about friendly kinds of experiences they've had, and they're bringing up stories, and oh yeah, well, it may take a longer time with that person, and you don't want to just push the pedal down and just try to literally close them on the negotiation right away. Might take a little while. You can throw out a trial close in terms of like, okay, is that good? Do we have a deal? Some kind of, without being so direct, or you might want to be direct. So again, we need to think about the analyticals, the amiables, the expressives, and the drivers, and what is the makeup? How does that work through? Um, and so with any negotiation, there's going to be conflict, right? Somebody's going to say something, and somebody's not going to like it. It's just what's going to happen. It's not always going to be win-win right from the beginning. Oh, that's perfect. We'll negotiate this. It's not always favorable for both parties right away. Sometimes it's unfavorable for both parties in the beginning because nobody wants to make concessions. Okay. So how do you handle conflict? And so we have to kind of think about there's multiple modes of handling the conflict. And so sometimes people, how do you handle conflict? Sometimes you are more of a competitor, competing mindset, more assertive. You're particularly uncooperative, meaning that whatever they say, you're just not going to buy into. You're not going to agree to. You're going to be difficult. And a lot of negotiators are difficult. Not everybody's easy, and that's okay. So think about how you're going to be and think about how they can be. And so if they're a difficult negotiation, yeah, you have a question? Does somebody have a question? Or is it just, oh, no, I guess not. Okay, well, you can always type it in the chat if you'd like. Um, okay. Um, so just kind of think about, based on your goals and your objectives, you know, how aggressive, assertive do we need to be? How much can they push us, perhaps? And then the on the opposite side is the accommodating mode, right? So there's the competing and they're accommodating. Accommodating is like you're not highly you're not highly assertive, right? You're just kind of like allowing things to happen. And some really good negotiators, this is important. Some really, really good negotiators appear to be very accommodating. They do. And most of the time they are until you get down to the nitty gritty. And then all of a sudden they shift to being very uncooperative or very assertive. So it's not just one mode all the time. It's kind of both modes. It's like a car. You have reverse, you have forward, you have different gears, first gear, second gear, depending on the terrain, right? More hills, demand something, up and down demand something. So we need to focus on what are the needs and desires of the other party, knowing if they are much more accommodating, usually, sometimes we might know that. Um, do we need to be as assertive? Maybe. Do we need to be uncooperative? Maybe not. We could be assertive and cooperative to a point if they're more accommodating. Now, again, if they're in the competing mode, and where negotiations get very difficult is when both are in the competing mode, the seller and the buyer. They're both assertive and uncooperative. That happens. Not too often, both are accommodating, unless, here's the thing, if it's a long-term relationship with you have with the buyer or the seller, that, and we'll talk about that in the next chapter, then both could be accommodating. And then it's a big win-win. And but you have to be prepared for everything. All right. So let's continue and talk a little bit about this. And this is human nature in terms of behavior. Okay. There are people get into avoiding mode. They don't want to be pinned down to a decision. So if you're, people that they're in the avoiding mode, they literally try to not to literally avoid the negotiation being done. They don't want it to be done because they think they can get better deal if they drag it on. So they're going to avoid. They're going to avoid fulfilling their needs and the needs of others, meaning that you're going to ask them questions and they're going to be very short with you, meaning that they're probably not going to answer your questions very well. So you're going to have to be really good about putting questions in terms of the wording, in terms of a way that they'll answer for you. Probably a lot more, open-ended questions are necessary. Or sometimes you might give them closed-ended questions to lead them to then an open question. Knowing that if they agree to something that's a closed-end question, you kind of get a little bit of yeses along the way to build to a big yes. And think about this. If you're avoiding, you're not going to, like I said, there's not going to be a win-win. They're just kind of avoiding the whole situation. They want to maybe get everything out of the deal and they don't want to give up anything. And then again, the opposite of avoiding is compromising. And that is somebody that's kind of like, okay, let's just meet in the middle. And as I said last week when I talked about that book Chris Voss wrote, never split the difference. What does that mean? You don't split the difference. That just by splitting the difference, that's not a win-win sometimes. That's kind of sometimes what he says, it's a lazy way to negotiate. Because if you split the difference, what he says in his way is that both sides are not getting enough of what they really want. So just splitting the difference, people are like, it's easier, but it's not as effective in terms of giving people a true win-win. Um, and you may always, if you know, there's been times I've been negotiations with people, and with a business partner that doing some business, and we were splitting revenues, and there was questions about where the leads came from. Like if I generated the leads and I closed the business, then it was my sale, 100%. If they generated a lead because they were a partner, they would get additional money. And so sometimes we knew, both myself and my business partner knew this other person. We both knew them, and we both brought them into our program, our online program. And so they're thinking, well, I should get the full commission because I brought them in, but I already knew them. And and I brought them in too. So what did we do? They recommended we split the difference. Each person was going to get, I don't know, I think it was $100 or $200. They said, let's split the difference. And I was like, okay. But I knew in my heart after I did that, I'm like, I shouldn't have done that because, truly, was more my lead than theirs. But was there another way around? Of course, we'll talk about some of those other ways around that as we dig deeper into this. But kind of think about that. Was that a win-win just to split the difference? When I'm thinking, I probably, I did it begrudgingly. They got a win. To me, it was a loss just to split the difference. So you can kind of see how compromising mode not necessarily creates a win-win, even though it says that the attempt is there. It doesn't always do that. Okay, let's continue talking about these different modes or behaviors, how to handle conflict as we think about the mode of a buyer. This is a mindset when we talk about mode, how their thinking is going to be. When people are in this collaboration mode, you want to get things done, right? So you're both assertive and cooperative. Right? I alluded to this earlier. We could be assertive and cooperative. So you're asking for things. You're a hard negotiator, but you're willing, that word willing, to take more risks. You're willing to allow some concessions being made because what you're trying to do is get a true win-win. And I think this particular mode is one of the best. Okay, collaborating. You're assertive, so you're willing to take risks, and yet you're willing to cooperate. Um, doesn't always work that way, right? But I think in my experience, and maybe think back and look at your experience in negotiations, when we're in this mode, it seems like most of the time once the negotiation has ended, it's a true win-win for both parties. Okay? And here what you just kind of think about this. You have, when we're in this mindset, more determination and more motivation to dig into the objections, to dig into the problems, because you're willing and you're willing to cooperate. If I was uncooperative and assertive, again, I'm not willing. I'm not willing. You're going to tell me your objections. I could care less. Basically, that's the truth. If you're uncooperative, that's how you view things. And I've dealt, and I'm sure we've all dealt with people like that. That's when people just walk out. It's like, done. Okay. Are we willing to walk out of the negotiation? That's a powerful tactic, because if we are willing, that's willing to take a risk, and we're willing to just leave, and then it's like no deal. Maybe they'll come back with a concession, maybe they won't. I've had some things where it's like no deal. Um, I've had customers come to me, and here's my prices, and here's how the package is set up. Well, they don't want to pay that. They're uncomfortable with that. They're trying to negotiate price in a particular way, and I'm not negotiating on that. For me, I'm uncooperative on negotiating price. I'm willing to do other things, cooperative on other pieces. So you can kind of see collaborating, it can get kind of complex, but I'm willing to explore. I'm cooperative enough, willing to explore in this collaboration mode possible solutions. Because then here's what I did. So I'm not willing to change my price, but I said, you know what? I'm willing, if you put up half now, and when we're half done, you pay the rest. Or here's what you do. You don't even pay anything now. Next month you pay, and then when we're half done, you pay the rest. So I'm like looking for different ways, thinking that, okay, they're just not wanting, they want to put it on a credit card. They don't want to pay the credit card each month, whatever. They need some time. Eventually, it was a no deal. Okay. Some negotiations, it's just a no deal. They walk away. I can come back and do something differently, and I might, but I'm not willing right now. I was in collaborating mode and they were not willing. So, okay, it happens. You both walk away, don't get the deal done. This is kind of an important thing to think about here. Okay, information control, right? The selling team leader, you kind of think about limits to information, meaning that do you want to divulge all the things, all of the objections you have at once, all of the good information, what you're willing to give at once? Or do you want to you want to keep some of that? Like there's always like, I'm willing to you're in the collaborating mode. I'm willing to make certain concessions, but I don't want to put it all on the line right away. I don't want them to see all my good points here, because then I lose the power in the negotiation. So it's a little bit of information control, and you can kind of see this play out. The buyer has information, the seller has information, and it's not like we're going to all spit it out at once. The question that was asked earlier, in terms of the negotiation, you put it down on paper, or is it verbal? Right? Here's where you need to be um, really mindful. If if they keep saying, put it on paper, make a proposal, written, and then we'll talk, that's hard. So if you have to do that, again, build in some leeway, build in some that you're not putting everything down that they have to have. I mean, I've had to make some large proposals to work with like a school system to want my coaching services for all their sports teams. They have 20 teams. They have lots of coaches, uh, a boys team, a girls team. They have trainers, and a big proposal. I tried to gather as much information as I could, but I couldn't gather everything because I don't know, I knew part of their budget. I didn't know how much more they could get. So what did I do? I put ranges in. I gave them options. If I have to write things down, I can put options. Like if you're the seller and you have to make a proposal, okay, you could have different price points, right? This X price point is if you bring in this many products. Y price point, you bring in more. Z, well, you have to bring in the same amount, but then you have different terms of payment. Give them options if you're writing, because then you kind of think about, okay, you don't want to be pinned down. And then you always have like a double Z option that you haven't even proposed yet. That's kind of in the back of your mind. And if you're in a team, think about that. Who's making the decision? How are they making the decision? It's more helpful in a negotiation when you're giving somebody an option, two options on the table. Which one do you choose? A or B? That feels, the psychology feels better than we just have B. Think about that in your own life, right? If you went to a car dealership and there was only one car color, and that's all you're negotiating on, and it had only one set of features, that's harder. It's like, this is what it is. But if there's multiple options, you then have some wiggle room as both the seller and the buyer, right? So think about how we're doing that. Um, this is kind of talking about behavior and how we go about the negotiation. So just kind of start to think through this. Negotiate in terms of the meeting. What's going to happen? This happens a lot in companies. An ambush meeting, a sneak attack. Your boss comes in and says, we got to have a meeting. Oh, the hell's going on? I'm not prepared for that, right? Colleagues come in and say, okay, at lunchtime, we're going to need to talk about this. You're using way too many resources. It's 11:30 and they're saying at noon, you got to meet. Sneak attack. Boom. How is that going to impact your ability to negotiate if it's a sneak attack? Quite a bit, right? Can you be prepared ahead of time? A little bit, sure. Can you be prepared fully? No. If you're a good negotiator, you're understanding that that's a possibility, that they might sneak attack you. The old expression, in negotiations of um, criminals, good cop, bad cop, right? Somebody comes in. This is different styles of selling. If you think about it, one is more collaborative, willing. The other one is unwilling, and they're playing against each other. They're on the same team. Think about this. They're saying, well, I'm the one that's collaborative. I'm more appeasing. He's the tough one, right? You could have in an ambush meeting, it's like they're all the tough ones because they're trying to take advantage of, don't have a lot of time. Um, this happens in sports. Kind of think about if they change up the dynamic and they just change the strategy quickly, you might be thrown off guard. So you got to have a strategy for dealing with when somebody tries to ambush you. Now you could use this as a strategy yourself, right? You're the buyer, you're the seller. But the thing to think about this is we should, if we get ambushed, like the buyer ambushes us, they call us, and we thought we had a week to make a proposal, and then all of a sudden you say, it's 4 o'clock. I need it on my desk by 5. That's an ambush. That happens. That's real life. You think you have the weekend to get it done. They say it's Friday. You know what? You know what? I need to make a decision by Friday, 5 o'clock. Can you put that together for me? We should never. Now, never is a tough word. As much as you can try to avoid getting ambushed, to throw it out, throw your offer out there without fully understanding what's happening in the issues. Now, you might negotiate that. Think about this. You're negotiating the ambush. They tell you, you know what? Need to know at 5. It's 4 o'clock. How do you negotiate that? They're ambushing you. You know what? I can't do it by 5. And you're serious. You know what? I know you need it soon. I would have liked till Monday. What if I get it to you by tomorrow, Saturday at 5 o'clock? That I could probably work with. Then you're prepared. See, there's different ways to deal with an ambush. To negotiate the ambush, right? Sometimes they might just say no, and you might just be, okay, I got to walk away. I'm sorry. Sometimes that is. With your boss, can you do that? Walk away? No, I can't do that, right? With a boss. But there's other ways to be, well, you know what, you haven't given me enough time, I can't get it to you by this, that it would be, um, a good proposal, how about, and I just can't get that information because I have other people to deal with. You can, all this, other people around kind of scenario. I got to talk to my advisors. There's other things that you can do to kind of stall, negotiate that. Let's kind of talk a little bit more about this. How do we, when we're negotiating the meeting, think about this, you know, things to think about. What can we do to ensure a comfortable environment? What is the conversation to break the ice about? And part of it, this is like, who am I dealing with? Again, if they're a group of drivers, they don't care less about your vacation or what's happening in your company that you're upset about. Maybe an expressive would like to know that, an amiable probably, a driver that couldn't care less. So break the ice with a driver, meaning, break the ice is like, how do we start the conversation? It's like, here's the proposal. Thank you for meeting with me. I appreciate it. We have 30 minutes. You state the facts. Here's what I have, based on this is the offer that we've come to right now. Take a look at it. Here are the points, and let's start. What is it that you know, you know, um, what are the points here that you're willing to accept, and let's go from there, right? Um, but think about this: we want to have a win-win, right? We want both parties to win in a negotiation. Again, it's not always going to be 50-50. A win for a buyer might only get 20% of what they want, but they got a big part of the 20%. You got 80%, right? But maybe what's most important to a buyer is the service, and they got the concessions on service, but they were willing to pay a higher price. So it's still a win-win. Um, and the agenda, who sets the agenda? The items to be discussed. Is that a power play? If I come in with an agenda and it's my talking points and it doesn't allow for the other party to have any talking points, what have I just done? I've kind of crafted something. That's not really win-win, but I could do, like, I'm crafting the agenda to focus on all my strengths. You could do that and allow time for questions, right? But as with anything, as with adaptive selling, adaptive communication, we need to be listening carefully because what they're saying, what they're not saying, their nonverbals tells you a whole lot, especially if it's a group. Obviously, we need to take notes. We need to keep track of what we discuss, what's been resolved. I mean, some of my business partner relationships where I have had to get attorneys involved, it takes a while. You're negotiating different points. There's 10 things you negotiate. Can you resolve everything at in the first meeting? No. Maybe you resolve 3 of the issues, and then there's still 7. You got to keep track and who's given what and how, right? And you come back to the table, and certainly there's cultural differences, right? Certainly, if you're dealing with somebody that is a whole culture of drivers, it's different. In certain cultures, they don't want to have to um, decide everything right away. They take time. Some are more secretive about how they make decisions. So it gets pretty complex. But as I said, good guy, bad guy routine. Um, you know, as I said, there are always negotiation situations where there's more than one person, and this is the play. You got to be prepared for it. Somebody is going to be the accommodating one, and somebody's going to be the assertive one. If ahead of time they're prepared, know that. And so you're not taken advantage of in that way, right? Somebody is going to lowballing, okay, intentionally underestimating the cost of something, so they know your product at cost is maybe $100 per unit. And so they'll come in and say, I want your the suits that I'm buying for my store, the men's and ladies suits, I'm only $60. You're like, that doesn't even cover your cost. They may intentionally do that just to piss you off, literally. Um, you have to be okay with that, and you have to say they might come in and they didn't do that, but you say, well, you know what, our base price is 120, and then we'll go from there. You purchase more items, we can get the cost down, but we're at 120. And take it or leave it. It could be take it or leave it on the price, but other things are there. But here's the thing: if somebody's lowballing you, what's the best response? No, no, I'm sorry. Again, if you're accommodating and you're not willing to take a risk, this is hard for you. But if you're willing to take a risk and you're willing to be assertive and accommodating, then you'll say no, 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 I'm not going to take that price because that's just not a good win-win. That's I lose on the deal. Now here's the thing, and we'll get into this a little bit later. We need to think about the long-term negotiation and the long-term relationship. And so it might come down to you have a long-term picture. And so maybe they lowball you, but you're thinking long-term, like this is going to be a 2-year agreement. I'm not thinking about the first 30 days. They lowball me. I'm going to take that lowball price. I'm willing. I'm willing to sell an item at a loss. They're called loss leaders, right? At a grocery store. Sometimes they have items that they lose money to get you in the door. In negotiations, you might be willing to take a loss. So there was this product, you may have heard about it. It's called Icy Hot. It's a salve that you put on for sore muscles. And it was sold in stores. And then another company kind of was going out of business. And so they bought the name Icy Hot, it's called. It's like a salve. It has, I think, like mint in it that gives you like a cooling sensation, but it actually works. It helps you recover muscles and gets rid of some of the pain and tension. And so this company who bought Icy Hot was all of a sudden willing. I think it cost them $1.25 to manufacture and put each one in a jar. Okay, um, they were willing, and I think that initially we're selling it for like $3. Okay, they were willing to just give it away for nothing. Okay, literally, you pay the shipping, we'll send it to you for nothing. They were willing to lose $1.25 every one they sent out. And they sent out tens of thousands, but they were so certain that they had a good product that somebody that would try it would want to buy another one. And so then it was a $3 sale. And a lot of companies do that. If you think about it, they're willing to take a loss in the beginning, willing to give you something for nothing, literally something for nothing. And sometimes you do have to pay the shipping because they know that they have a good product or service and you'll come back for it. So there's this lowballing, and you could say no, but there's points where you literally could take a lowball offer, understanding, again, mind you, that the long-term relationship will even things out. Okay. So how do you deal with like people are negotiating and it's like a win-lose? Like I mentioned this, like they're nibblers, right? So you negotiate an agreement and somebody has to sign, right, the contract or the agreement. And so you negotiate everything and they're getting ready to sign on the dotted line and they go like, oh, by the way, and before I do that, I know we've negotiated everything, but you know what? I want an extra 30 days on the payment here. Um, and so, or you know what? You're offering me this price, and I know we negotiated the price, but based on bringing in 1,000 of the suits, but I'm only now going to be able to bring in 500 because of space limitations, but I want that same price. Uh-oh, right? They're nibbling. And so buyers are going to do that. We have to be prepared, right? It is a variation of lowballing. They're trying to get something more for you. Okay. So how do we deal with that? It's different ways, right? Literally emotional outbursts. This is a tactic of negotiation. You literally visibly show that you're pissed off. Ha, what? Are you serious? We already had the negotiation and you visibly show that you're pissed off because you probably are. Um, there is, some um, definitely psychology to this because if you're somebody all of a sudden shows that, an outburst, my goodness, my boss is going to be so pissed at me that you just did that. And the boss is there and you're just like, the boss is the bad guy. And they're just like, are you kidding me? We're not going there. That's ridiculous. Um, and so that's going to be like, oh, then the buyer might have to take a step back. So that is a way to deal with it. Literally, know your customer, know the buyer, to know that if that could just break down the negotiation completely, because then maybe it's not worth doing that. But there's other things to do about it. Budget limitation tactic, or budget, what they call bogey, which is like playing things out that aren't really there. You're claiming you have ceilings on your budget. You know, again, buyer comes to you and says, I want, they're trying to get something at the end after it's already been negotiated. And you could say, you know what, I would love to be able to do that. I can't because, I have a budget in my company in terms of their products and we sell them at this price. And if I go any lower, then I can't give you the deal on the the service. And so you kind of just throw this out. You're kind of like throwing things out, and you're trying to say I just can't do that based on something. And so that's a possible way to deal with it, right? Um, Other ways to deal with it, and things that happen, browbeating. This happens too. That you're attempting to alter their enthusiasm. you know, um, from a standpoint of what are they going to be doing? Wow, it could be done in a couple different ways. Wow, you're such a good negotiator. Wow, I just you've gotten such a great deal on this by your negotiation. You're appealing to their self respect. You're appealing to their self esteem, almost kind of like flattery. Wow, you're really good at this negotiation. Don't have to say it in that way, but and then it becomes this jujitsu. Jujitsu is a martial art. And what you're basically doing is you're using the energy of the other person and you're moving with that energy. Okay. So negotiation jujitsu is you're like, okay, they go here. I'm going to go over here. And so basically, yeah, they're going to attack me with something, a lowball offer, but I'm going to do the complete opposite. I'm going to ask for more money. They're lowballing and say, you know what? The offer that I gave you, we just the prices just went up. I'm sorry, but we have to now offer at this value. And they're a little. It's like it's like what just happened. Both sides just kind of lowballed or boom. Now it gets people thinking. Oh wow. So then, if the original price comes back on the table, it looks better. That's why people do that, right? Um, and then, what is the goal here with these kind of negotiation styles? It's like to calm things down, to calm the buyer, to help them to close the sale, so they don't get too emotional, right? Because you're like shocking them in a way, and they might give you a lowball offer, and you might just be like, Wow, I've not seen somebody do that before. I'm going to have to go to my boss now, you know, and they're out of town, so it's going to take me a few days to get back. You're just like redirecting, and so you bought yourself some time to deal with this. All right, so there's other things to think about here, and we'll go through a few of these, then we'll take a break. Um, Again, other win lose tactics, like here, you know, limited authority. Well, they try to get a low ball price. Well, you know what? I can't give a concession on that. That's my boss's boss that does that, right? Or you can have a bring up a minor. This happens a lot too. This red herring. They bring up a minor point to distract you. They just throw stuff out there, right? All of a sudden you're negotiating price. The deal is done, and they just throw out stuff. You know what? Again, we'll maybe talk about clothing and suits. You know what? I know you said you were going to split the different, you know, blue and a black suit and a brown suit, but you know what? I don't like the buttons on the black suit. Can you change the buttons before you send them to me? And it's like that's not a what are you doing? That's a red herring. Negotiated. They're trying to distract you. What do you do on that? Well, it's like, okay, you know, here's what we agreed on. If you don't like the brown suits, we can't do that right now. Let's just pull the brown suits out. We'll work on, you know, we'll negotiate. This is already done. We'll just pull the brown suits out. Or we just can't do that, right? It's a distracting technique. And there's other things to think about. Trial balloon is like a trial close. You float an idea to see if they'll give you a concession on it. Just throw something out. Um, and this happens, right? You know that you can offer free shipping on your products. You don't want to do that. You don't want to give that concession. But here's a floating an idea. What if, you know you can give free shipping, but okay, what if let's just throw this out to give you something to think about. What if we take 10% off the shipping price? That's a trial balloon, and that might work. And you're like, oh, because you know the price that you gave them is tough for them to take. Now you're trying to give them something else, and you know you could give them free shipping, but you're not doing that. So it's like to just float that idea, see what they say. Oh no, 10% is nothing. Are you kidding me? Give me 50% off free shipping, 50% off shipping, and you can be difficult. Like I don't know if I can get that. I'll see. I'll have to call the transportation department and see if they're willing to do that. You come back and you say, yeah, we can do that. Oh, done deal. And here's the other thing too. It's like total silence so the buyer has an offer being made. That's a tactic. They throw out an offer. Will you take it? Stone face, quiet. And this is always said in a negotiation. The first person to talk is the person that loses once the offer is made. So it could be a very long time and very awkward silence, 30 seconds, a minute. The psychology is such that we hate silence in a negotiation, even both sides. So somebody's always like this. It's the dead space. It's like, just got to talk. I just got to say something. Okay, I'm willing to give you something. You just got to guard that impulse to not give the concession up, right? Just to be there on that piece. Um, we'll talk about this one other thing. We'll get into concessions and then we'll take the break here in just like 3-4 minutes. Um, when is it effective to make concessions, right? And so we kind of think about this again. If we're in that mode of being a little bit more collaborative, assertive and collaborative, assertive and willing, we're willing to make some concessions. We don't want to do it right away. We don't want to give them all the stuff and throw that out on the table. We want to hold some back, and maybe we can make the deal and not give any concessions. That's a possibility. Um, Trying to get the best deal, right? Win, win for me. And I want them to win too, honestly. but I don't want to have them win a huge amount where I'm losing a potential more profit, right? You want to be aware of what's happening and when to make concessions. So kind of think about who are you dealing with and how the positions might change once concessions are made. So here's just some guidelines, just some things to think about. You never make concessions unless certain things are happening. Again, all the buyer demands are known. The objections are out. At least all that you know about could possibly be out. That makes sense, right? Because then the issues are on the table, then you know what you're dealing with. Because if you don't know what you're dealing with, then it's like a shooting gallery. You know, I'm going to make a concession, but I have no idea if that's going to be good or not. I have no idea if um, that I even had to do that. And obviously you're going to make a concession. You got to kind of think about, are they going to give you something back? Sometimes you make a concession, you want the order. So the concession is for the order. Sometimes the concession is that you want, them to bring in more units or longer contract length. And so what you want to make sure is if you give a concession in your mind, you're not just giving it up and getting nothing in return. Because then you're going to be thinking, oh, should have done that, right? So you don't want, that. So kind of think about that. And they should be gradual concessions. It's like if you know you can give uh, your company is giving you a leeway on pricing and you're offering the suits for $100, you can come down to 80. The first concession is not, okay, we'll give you the suits at $80. No, $95. I can come down a little bit, right? And that becomes this ability to then have, more flexibility in the negotiation. You don't want to be pinned down too early, both sides, right? Um, we'll cover this slide and then we'll take a break. Um, Actually, we'll cover these two slides on concessions. So we don't want to be afraid to say no, right? That's, just no. And that opens up the door for concessions, right? And sometimes concessions are offered are tentative until the final agreement is made. You know what? If you propose a scenario, I can give you this free shipping if the sale is made within 30 days and everything is done. And if you can't, then that free shipping is off the table, right? You're trying the product out for 10 days, you know. After 10 days, you either buy it or you're done with the product. But here's the thing, if you buy the product and it's before the 10 days, you don't have to pay the shipping. Um, so, and here, be confident. Again, we're not giving um, concessions away carelessly. We're not throwing all the concessions out, your maximum value. And we know we don't have to accept the first attempt at a concession. If the buyer is wanting some stuff, we don't have to accept that. There might be other things we can negotiate on if you're not willing to negotiate on price, but there's other pieces, right? And it also, here's the thing about concessions, people get to see the value of what you're offering. So a concession adds value. That's a big piece to think about it. So you don't want to just throw concessions out and just like, here, free shipping, da, 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 da. No, because then they see no value. If you're willing to just give it all away, it has no value. But if you show that it does have value, exactly. If you show clearly that, it's not easy for you to give the concessions, the psychology, the behavior is like, there must be something more value, right? And a good salesperson is not doing this to like maximize, to take advantage of the buyer. They're not doing it to that. That's not the good salesperson. They want to get the best value for their company, but they also want to build value for their customer. Okay. And then the last piece here, we just kind of think about when a mistake is made. And we make mistakes sometimes, and I've had this happen. I negotiated with a professor a price on a book, and I made a mistake on calculating the value, what we can offer. And so I think I said something like, we can sell you the book for $57, and I made a mistake, and it came out. It was like, oh, I can't go below 71. A big deal. But here's when a mistake happens. I just was like, you tell them, I made a huge error here. I calculated things wrong based on this. I'm so sorry. This is what I can offer you. And if you're genuine, usually, yeah, they'll be upset, but then they'll understand. And you give them the reason why this is the way it is. Okay. Um, Also, kind of think about these things. We can remain non-committal when they ask for a bottom line in price. Like, what is the lowest that you're willing to sell me this product for? Well, probably we're willing maybe to go down to $75, but I don't know if I can do that right now. I have to check with my boss. We have to check with the suppliers because, they might not be able to get you if you bring in 2,000 suits. I don't know if we can do $75. So it's an idea that's floated out there, but we're not committing to it yet, right? We should know when to stop. We should know when to use silence. If the plan is the session, well, if we've done a good job of planning it, we know that we've given way to the store. And sometimes the best deal is a no deal, literally, if we're willing to take risks. Okay. So we'll leave this as we take a break. Consequences of a no agreement. Just kind of think about that. If you both parties step away, both parties say no, what is the consequence of that? And just kind of know that ahead of time. All right, let's take 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. We'll finish negotiation. We'll then start into long-term relationships. Okay. Leazette has a question. I'm going to look at that at the break, and we'll answer that when we get back. Okay. All right. Let's take 10 minutes.
There is no sound, Professor.
Is that better?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. Good. Um, okay. So there was a question in the chat that Liazat posted about a book she read by Richard Thaler, somebody else talking about a value and negotiating and those kinds of topics. And what's been referred to misbehaving the value or misrepresenting the value can be referred. You can use obviously product or service, and she wants to know in terms of like transactional values. There's the difference between transactional values, and they refer to the satisfaction of a deal. For instance, a discount or concession, like things that you get. And her question has to do with interviews, which is a really good question. If her skill is a direct value, which it is, what might be a transactional value? Okay. So here, and again, I don't know the role that you're interviewing for, but let me give you some scenarios where there's a transactional value. I've been hired myself personally. I'm working for one company in publishing, selling textbooks, and a competitor hires me. They steal me away from their company. Okay. I have value in the interview of all my skills, but I also have this transactional value because I can bring my customers with me. Not necessarily because they're using my old product's book, my old company's book, but I have the value I built with them. So the transactional value, you know what, you hire me, yeah, you're going to pay me more money um, than my current role. If you want me, you're going to have to pay me more money. But here's the deal: you get potential to have a lot more business. excuse me. Um, so that's a potential transaction. There's also this um, things beyond your skill, right? If they hire you, maybe you can start earlier than somebody else, right? Maybe you, and that's beyond skill, that's just timing, right? Maybe you're willing to take less vacation time. That's not skill. That's just, do you see what I'm saying here, Lizette? There's other pieces beyond just the skill level, just the dollar amount that they're hiring you for. There's always pieces. So you could be negotiating and they've already worked out, here's the job responsibility, here's what you're doing, here's your resources, here's what we're going to pay you. And so you can negotiate, I need an extra week of vacation time, or I need 5 more sick days in the year. You know, there's other pieces here. Because if they like you and they like your skills, then you're just like, you see how things are? Now, there's some people that are just not willing to take a risk. One of the risks is you piss off the person interviewing you and they get turned off. But here's the thing, if it's for a sales job, it's for a job that you're negotiating or you're communicating, they're going to see what's going on. They're going to be like, they're going to almost envision a applicant doing that, right? And that, so that then becomes this whole picture of, will they make a concession? And I got a little bit extra. Yeah, they weren't willing to up their price of the salary they offered me, but I got something else. I feel a little bit better about taking the role. Mm, more of a value that I feel I got. Now I'm even more vested in succeeding in this company. You see how that works? That's
Yeah,
why, yeah,
yes, thank you. I understand now. For instance,
perfect.
if I have my personal car and can use it for purposes, I need to go somewhere, it also might be accepted like a transactional value, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So you're using your car and you could do other things and you can, do, you know, um, uh, instead of them buying you a car or them paying for you, you could, giving them extra value. I'm going to just use my own car. You don't
Okay, I
have to,
understand.
yeah, yeah. So
Thank you
that's
very
good.
much.
You're welcome. Perfect. Okay, here. So let's talk a little bit about successful. We'll just, the last couple pieces, we'll just um, what does successful negotiations look like? Right? Win-win. But sometimes they're not yet a win-win. So how do we like close the deal, right? Kind of think about things like here. You can achieve your goals while the selling team doesn't, right? The buyer. Different objectives. The buyer has a certain objective, and the seller doesn't get all that. So it's not a win-win, right? Obviously, because the selling team still, there's still something, maybe they're not happy that you're not bringing in enough of my product. The buyer got the price they want, they got the terms. Selling team doesn't. It's like, that's not a win-win. Is that successful? From a buyer's standpoint, right? But a win-win is about long-term relationship building. So sometimes it's like the seller expects to achieve their goals in the near future, right? That might be as a result of that. And then that kind of then maybe gets a win-win. Like I said, that company Icy Hot. Now that was a product, a one-time purchase that they were losing money every time they sold an Icy Hot. They lost money. And so, but they thought, okay, the long-term value of that, the customer is going to come back. In fact, they knew on average that customer that uses it, not everybody did it, right? Not every 100% of the customers that took that offer would buy another one, but a certain percentage would. I don't know, remember, I think it was 20% or 25%. 25% of those people that had that jar of icy hot, over the next 5 years, they knew they would buy 9 more of those jars. Wow. And so they basically said the lifetime value of that product is 3 times 9, $27. And I'm giving away one for free. I'm losing $1.50 of my cost. And I'm making an extra 25, 26, 25 and a half dollars. What percentage is that? It's like hundreds of percent, 1,000%. That's a pretty good deal. So you kind of know, it's like, okay, are they willing? They're willing to take a risk. That company was willing to take a risk. 75% of those jars they sent out, nobody would ever buy them again. It cost them money, right? But here is, that they made up that in with the 25% of people that did, because they bought it. And then not only that, but those successful people, or those people that enjoyed it, they talked to other people. They sold the product through their friends, word of mouth, right? And then another piece here, we just kind of think about these are just, some technical terms here. We should be aware in negotiating when we have things in writing. That's important here. In an agreement, the legal staff obviously there's this clause, you may have heard it, force majeure, right? It's pronounced major, even though it's, spelled that way. It's a clause. It protects your company from natural disasters, things that happen that you just can't predict. So here's the thing. I was reading about in the United States, the Postal Service. We have a government-funded postal service. I mean, there's private companies, FedEx and UPS and DHL, and there's all these other companies. But the U.S. Postal Service has, they ship mail. They're still the largest mail provider. You pay, you get it. You ship their products, you even buy insurance. What happens sometimes is, say there's a hurricane, which happens, and it wipes out all of the mail in that one postal facility. Can they be responsible for a hurricane that came through? They have a clause in there. It's a force majeure that if you looked at the fine print of when you ship a package, if something like that happens, they're not responsible. That happens. I think there was a movie, Tom Hanks, years ago. He was a FedEx person. He was on a plane. I think it was called Castaway. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe you know the name Tom Hanks, famous actor. But he was in a plane. They were FedEx. They were shipping, internationally. Plane crash. He crashes on a desert island. All these packages are floating away, and that's a force majeure. They just couldn't deliver. If you haven't seen that movie, it's kind of a interesting movie. And at the end of the movie, he's rescued a few years later off this island. He comes in, he has this package that he brings with him when he is able to get off the island, and he builds this raft to do it. And he brings a few of the packages with him, and he delivers them multiple years later, and then you're kind of left hanging. Sorry, that's a little tangent, but Castaway, C-A-S-T, here, I'll put it. Castaway. Probably 20 years old, maybe 25 years old, but it's good. There was a story called Robinson Crusoe that it's kind of based on that. That was a book written 100 plus years ago. All right, other things to kind of think about, again, in writing, because people have talked about when we put things in writing, clauses, our firms, legal teams kind of add these things in there, triggers. Inflation, labor costs, if things change, raw materials, you can have that as a piece in your agreement. That if, say you're shipping I don't know, big ticket items, right, that have lots of raw materials in them. But if the raw materials go up, or for instance, like because inflation is so rampant in so many different areas, if the shipping costs go up, you have the right to increase your shipping by up to 10% in the next 2 years. You'll put that in there. Okay. And then kind of think about this too, environmental impact. Um, it just gives you, when you a successful negotiation, when you put things in writing, it just gives this opportunity for both sides to kind of peer into the future and project out what the possible things might happen in the interactions. Okay. And then, obviously we want to develop a long-term relationship. Want to develop a long-term relationship. And that's the piece. Um, that's the piece. And that's what this next chapter is about, long-term relationships. So that's a nice segue. Like I said, that book by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference, Richard Thaler's book. There's a lot of good books on negotiation that a lot of it has to do with preparation and communication, things we've talked about, preparing, being aware of potential um, roadblocks, being aware of potential objections, and understanding that you might have things that come up that you don't know how to deal with. That's okay. They might try to, blindside you, right? They might try to take advantage in different ways. And that's part of a negotiation. And so your ability to walk away is a potential. If you're willing to take more risk, that is a helpful thing. Um, Sometimes you can't. If I'm driving and there's an emergency and I got to get somebody to the hospital, I'm going to get them to the hospital. I'm not going to be able to negotiate the price of my services right then and there. You just don't do it, right? Later on, potentially the bill comes and you're like, whoa, there might be a piece then later on, but certain times not, right? I'm not negotiating that. I want service, right? If you're a pipe bursts in your house, leaking water all over your floor, you're not gonna, you want a plumber that comes right away. You have to pay more money. You're not going to be able to really negotiate. Yeah, well, you're adding $200 because you're coming in the middle of the night. No, maybe $100. Just like goodbye, right? So there are times and places to negotiate. We have to be aware of that. Okay, know where you're coming from. If you can prep as much as you can, and the personality styles, all these things we talked about. All right, good. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Not totally, because it's still along the lines of once we build the relationship, we still have to negotiate, right? But there's ways to build relationship, and that's what I want to talk about. So I'll close that and I'll open up the next chapter. All right. Building partnering relationships. Okay, here, give me 1 second. I'm just going to close the door. All right. Okay, learning objectives. And there's a lot here. We won't be able to finish this chapter more than likely, but we're going to get started with it. Think about this. The difference in relationships exists, certainly, between buyers and sellers. What are the different types? When each type of relationship is appropriate. What are the characteristics of successful partnerships? That's helpful. Study those. That's important. Understanding benefits and risks when we do partner. I'll give you some personal experience in partnering relationships too that I had. How do we develop them over time? What are the necessary ingredients to a good partnership? And what are the responsibilities of a salesperson in a partnership? So start to kind of think about things like that. Um, we've talked about this word value a lot in previous value proposition, building value. And the biggest thing, and this talks about again that example I use, icy hot. It's a real product. It's still available. You still can buy it. It's probably more than $3 now. But the long-term lifetime value of a customer, and we need to kind of think about that as we're in sales, as we're exploring. Even think about, okay, a company hiring you for a job. They're probably thinking, what is the lifetime value of me per hiring that person? Meaning, how long might they stay here and give me all their skill and value? They're thinking about that when they make a hire, right? That's another thing to think about. Maybe they look at you as somebody that, and in the hiring process, that this is different than skill, another piece to negotiate. You're willing, and they see that you're willing to stay longer. Not mean that you don't have aspirations to do better, but it's like you're more of a company person, willing to give them a commitment for a longer term. So customers, the primary revenue stream for companies, right? And so building a strong relationship, you always have to kind of think about, okay, what's the lifetime value of this customer? Because if you understand that, that allows you so much flexibility in negotiate, in making sales calls, in being adaptive in what you have to do during the call to close the deal. Because you'll know that that buyer is going to be there for 10 years. Well, you can't predict that, but the company relationship, it could be long term. And so maybe you don't make any money in selling the software in the first year. Maybe all the money is made in the third year. Maybe you just break even. Maybe it takes a while just to break even. And then all of a sudden, in that fourth year, is when it's just service and you've done, yeah, sure, they'll have upgrades to the software, but now is where the big money's made. And you can see that. And successful companies are really good at understanding that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some different things to consider. Relationship marketing. Okay, this is a big one. Um, creating the type of relationship that best suits the customer needs, right? It may or may not be a partnership. I would say sometimes, more often than not, it might not be a partnership. But don't ever discount that they might not partner in a specific way. Now, stronger relationships build brand loyalty. Absolutely. Talk about marketing. Icy hot. Anything. Like if you bought a car, I bought a Subaru, and we've gone through 3 or 4 Subarus in my family. That's a long-term relationship. Let's see here. So Liza said, but those who sell apartments, for instance, there's actually no LTV. Actually, it's just a one-time deal. That's true. But think about this again, if you did a good job and they like you, they'll talk about you, right? More than likely, word gets out. More than likely, and it's houses, apartments sell all the time. People post who's selling the house. Sometimes there's not so obvious. A lot of times it is. So you make a sale. Yes, it's one time, but maybe it allows you to have a name known in that area. And so selling at one time is value to you more than just the one sale, because now you're successful in that. You can point to that, and it allows you to be more confident in the next time. Okay. So there's not just that piece, right? Again, we're just thinking about this longer term relationship and how that might impact. Okay. But that's a really good point. Um, again, stronger relationships, behavior loyalty. There's just two things: behavior loyalty, they'll keep coming back to you for more of the product, more of the service. And then there's this attitudinal loyalty, emotionally attached. Those people, How many people have iPhones, right? The opposite is true too. Those that have Android devices and things, right? Am I attached to my Apple? You know, I came from Android. I used to use it until I changed, and I'm like, oh, I like it because a lot of people I talk to FaceTime and it's free calls. There's lots of things internationally you can do. I'm very attached to that. So I keep buying the same product and I'm emotionally attached to it in a certain way. So when I buy a new phone, I really don't even think about switching brands, right? Anything, clothing, food, maybe that's not as much, but maybe you find a particular brand of rice that you love. This has happened. And then product, then all of a sudden that goes out of business. You can't find that brand anymore. So you have to try to find something similar. You're like, oh, there's nothing so close. Um, Even a little thing like this, dental floss. Think about things like this. My family, we have a dental floss that we love. It has a cinnamon flavor. It works real well. Um, we've been buying it for years. All of a sudden, this company's still around, but they're discontinuing this dental floss, the cinnamon one. It's like, so there's a conflict. Do I stay with the company? They don't offer the product anymore. How much was I tied to the company? Loyalty by an attitude. I really like the product. They don't have it anymore. If I can find something better from another company, I will. Otherwise, I'll use a different dental floss flavor, if you will. Right? So there's pieces that we need to talk about. Absolutely. So yeah, Samya put in the chat, being an Amazon buyer, similar products are always there, the suggestions, right? So kind of even think about, we are making purchase decisions. We are buyers. We are also sellers of things. And so how does this partnerships, this relationship building impact us, right? And if people make suggestions and you see them, it allows you then to kind of try things before you try them. So customer reviews are, right? Other types of relationships, there's market exchanges, right? This is just, sellers and buyers, each party is concerned about its own benefit. From the standpoint of, in solo exchanges, there's just one, self-interest. Think about a flea market you go to, I've been to where they're selling products, maybe they're a reseller and of shirts, and they're selling the shirts at a very low price. They're really probably not very concerned about value to their buyer. They're not, they're just there to sell. And so if you buy them, great. If not, they don't care. So it's more of a numbers game. But you kind of think about those kind of things. You don't engage with any business beyond that. It's a one-time transaction. There's that. There are pieces there that serves a purpose, right? If I own a restaurant and I'm the chef and I own the restaurant, do I want people coming in one time and then leaving and never coming back? Of course not. So I want them, it's not going to be a solo or market exchange. I want a long-term relationship so that they come back, right? The functional relationship is long-term. So they become loyal customers. Maybe they don't have the best meal experience every single time they come to my restaurant. But if I built up the value long enough, and then all of a sudden, one time the waiter or waitress has an off night and they don't get as good service, or maybe the food in the kitchen is not as great, they're willing to allow that to happen. Or maybe they have such a good relationship, they come to the chef and say, you know what, my meal wasn't great tonight. It never happened. That's, I was a little disappointed. Good chefs, they walk around the restaurant. You've probably been to a restaurant where that you've seen that. Chefs come by and she sits down with the table and she says, how do you like the meal? It's great, but you know what? This wasn't up to snuff. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can we redo that? Can we get you something else? We're going to pull that off the menu. I mean, the bill. Customer satisfaction, all needs are met. We talked about this too, which is kind of like an objection, kind of like a problem. We're dealing with a problem, a bad meal. If they are aware of it and they try to handle it in a way that satisfies you, that builds value. That's huge. You have a problem that builds value because now they can rely on you. And most people are willing, if they have a relationship, to give somebody a second chance. Most people. All right. Again, depending on the relationship. Partnerships, both parties concerned about the welfare of the other. That's what it comes down to. If it's a good partnership, it should be win-win. Where there's problems, it starts as a win-win, and all of a sudden one side is then taking advantage of the other side. We'll talk a little bit about that and what happens and how to deal with that. But think about this. There's two kinds of these win-win partnerships. There's relational and strategic. Okay. So relational partnerships, they have a close personal relationship in terms of how things are marketed. Open, honest communication. I'm sorry, not marketed, marked, open and honest communication. Um, it's like you're dealing with a friend and you can trust each other. And small details will get worked out. It's again, you're going to the restaurant, you know the chef, and sometimes it's not a great meal. They'll work with you. And so it's not necessarily strategic. It's not like they have to try to sell you. Maybe they're going to tell you, well, we're going to have some new menu items and you're going to really like that. It's not like they're trying to sell you, we notice you haven't been buying dessert when you come there. What can we do? We want you to buy more dessert. It's not really like that, right? Most places are not like that. But it's just a honest relationship, good communication, where there's trust. And then there's strategic relationships. And there's blend between the two, but these strategic relationships are, again, long-term business partnerships. One is making an investment, time, money, resources to improve the profitability of both parties, right? So a relationship, it could be, a supplier and a seller, right? They have a relationship. A paint company needs raw materials. They need paint cans. They need brushes. They need the color. They need the machines to do everything. And so sometimes it becomes this ability to allow the one customer buyer to go beyond, and so there is trust there, but sometimes there are opportunities. Let's say opportunities. Things get uncovered because sometimes one then becomes taking advantage of the other, exploiting. Sometimes there's joint opportunities where you have it, but I say when these don't work, and we'll talk about that. Where they don't work, it's just like all of a sudden you had a value built, a win-win, and then all of a sudden it becomes less of a win-win. And I'll share an experience that I've had about that because it kind of dissolves the partnership a little bit. Sometimes you can go past it, look the other way. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you got to have a new partner, right? So how do you choose the right partner? And how do you choose it in terms of the relationships? A couple things to consider: the size of the account, size of the company, size of the company, access, image in the marketplace, right? If you're dealing with somebody that's a potential partner, and they're well liked in the marketplace, and by partnering with them, that goodwill, because they have a big customer base, that people like them, that if you partner with them, they'll associate those customers with you. So one of the partners that I'm starting a relationship with is this apparel company that they sell to sports apparel in the extreme sports area. They have a big following. Okay, they're already very well liked in the marketplace, and so the benefit for me is finding this relationship. That's an area that I haven't really marketed to yet, and so but they have an existing clientele there, so it gives me access to all that, those potential people in a different sports, but a very different um, environment. And so there's always pieces. And then innovation is creativity. You find the right partner, they can give you new products, new offerings, new services, new ways to think about your existing customers. So as you try to look for partnerships, um, and having the right partners, it expands business exponentially. Absolutely. That's kind of why you would want it. Um, how do we use technology to improve efficiency in terms of this relationship? And um, so we'll talk about this. Technology, obviously drives many areas of our performance as salespeople, as people, right? So kind of think about this knowledge management technology, all that goes into that. I mean, it helps people, salespeople, manage all the information. We talked about the CRM, customer relationship management, the database, tracking all the people, tracking what they need, how you've sold them in the past, some of their objections in the past, what they've bought from you. There's a lot of that piece. The relationship technology is huge because it tracks patterns and it tracks potential and it tracks opportunity that you may be missing. That's always helpful to kind of see that. And then if you kind of think about this, there's different, like, we'll call phases of a relationship, right? Um, as we're looking, as we're exploring, um, this could be one relationship that we're building as a partner or multiple, right? And also think about this as a buyer, as a seller, you want a relationship with the buyer. It follows this kind of these stages, these phases. They're stages, really. Okay, so awareness. It's uh, really at the very beginning, right? You're remember that funnel we talked about, leads, prospects, all the way to the customer, and then the satisfied customer. So it filters in. It's kind of like that. So at the very beginning stage, it's not like you haven't made the sale. It's the prospect. The very beginning here, it's not like there's no transaction taking place, right? You're looking for prospects, the awareness. You're getting information. And the buyer is doing the same thing. They're identifying sources of supply. So there's awareness on both sides. As a seller, okay, here's my product. Who are my potential customers, prospects? And okay, being aware, building that. That's planning, right? And then the buyer's doing the same thing. And so this then becomes building, based on pay attention. Okay, how do we choose when we become aware? Reputation, image in the marketplace. Sure, you want to deal with a buyer that's constantly a pain in the butt, and that they're hard to deal with. There are some families that I've worked with that are difficult families, and then I realized that if I could find partners that already filter the families, meaning that, I'm not saying they're bad families, but I'm saying difficult, meaning that they're called helicopter parents. You probably heard that term, where they're kind of making all the decisions and constantly watching over their kids. And if I'm working with student athletes, sometimes it's helpful to have parents that are committed and supportive, but not to every stage of the process. And so this partner that I work with for the last few years, one of the partners anyway, is they filter the families, meaning they won't choose. They try to filter out those parents that do that. They're not perfect with it. Sometimes they'll let those in. But those difficult parents that are making too many decisions for their kids and not letting the kids fail, they kind of allow those families to leave. And so if I just partner with this, obviously I'm partnering with other people too, but I know already that their reputation and image allows a certain customer base for me. That's another reason. And so the supplier relationship management, there's think about they have technology as well. Again, two sides of the coin here we need to think about. The buyer has tracking software. They know how many salespeople they're dealing with. They know who the products are selling. They know how the products are selling. And if you sold them a product that's not moving in their business, meaning it's not selling, they're going to know that. So they're always looking for reductions in their costs, right? Greater efficiency, other benefits. Everybody is trying to be more efficient. That's what it comes down to, hopefully. Um, and then you kind of work together again. But at the very beginning, everybody's trying to explore and be aware. And that's what this next stage is, the exploration. Okay, we're going to try some products. We're going to see what works. We're going to see what the benefits are. If you're a new business owner or you're just getting into sales, this is a big thing. You don't know all the top uh, customers. You probably have a list. You probably know what you've done business with, but there's all these new potential customers out there, and you're just exploring. You're just trying to figure out where you need to spend your time. And so then there's this whole stage. Okay, we're still talking about relationship building here. Okay, from the standpoint of you make a sale, you bring a customer on. There's this onboarding process. What are the new customers taught? They buy my product, they buy my service, and it helps them know they just purchased. It helps continue to show the value and how they should use the product most efficiently. So let me show you one of my products. And just to give you a real example, so I have this card deck. It sort of goes along with my book, but there's like 57 cards here. Each one is an activity. And I'm using it, I'm not trying to sell this to you, so, there's no pressure to buy them. But each one is an activity, so that's just the deck here. And in this onboarding process, I have a customer buys these. My onboarding is I created a little pocket guide of how best to use these cards. Okay, this is my ability to onboard a customer. I've shipped these cards. I have some customers in Australia. Somebody in Ireland just bought one. And so, yes, they can see information on the website, but how do they use this? How do they become more efficient? Unless they hire me to help them with it, they now have an onboarding process. So I've always thought about that. And that builds value. You need to kind of think about that. So when you get a customer, what is it the value you're bringing? Obviously beyond, just the products and service. And that's part of the onboarding, right? So what can they expect in terms of billing from your company, payments, other procedures, that help the customer experience? So they buy this, and sometimes I'll send another email out checking in on them. How are things going? You're using it for a sports team or your own child, just to find out. And maybe I'll also send them a link to an article I wrote that might be of help to them. And I only have one deck. It's not like I want them to, I guess they could buy more of the decks, but I'm not trying to sell them more stuff. I'm trying to build the value because I know the long-term value of the customer. They may come to me for coaching services, but I'm not concerned with that right away. I want them to be satisfied with what they have. I'm trying to build a relationship with them. So my onboarding process is give them more information that they could be helpful in using this. And then, this exploration stage and during this phase, it's like, think about this. It's exactly what I'm saying here. I want them to know that I'm dependable and competent. So they're testing that, right? They're trying to figure it out. And if they buy these cards and they say, they're trash, I don't know what they are, I can't use them, that is not a good thing. So I want to figure out, okay, thinking ahead of time, how can I help them use these and make a difference with their athletes or the coaches that are using them? And so then I always kind of think about that, and the buyers, they might, if I sell this and, I did have the instructions in there, they might, I get somebody to say, I don't know how to use them. So they'll give me an objection. And then they'll be upset. But now I have a piece because I thought about it ahead of time. Now they could see how to use it. And it's a useful guide. And I'm also writing up another document that's even more detailed to send them. Because if they're using it in a group, it might be even more difficult, so that I'm giving them more value. And so as they explore, and then then it becomes here this expansion stage. This is the fun part in sales, expansion, right? And a relationship. Both parties are exploring the benefits. How do we do more business? How do we grow the business? Like a buyer certainly is dependent on the seller as a source of supply, but they also, in the expansion stage, they might, so they're happy with this, maybe they'll bring in my book. They're happy with this, maybe they'll bring in my coaching. Maybe they'll want me to come and do a program for their team. I don't know. Maybe they'll want the online course. So Apple does an amazing job with this. If you think about, they have these product, what do they call them? Um, Product suites, if you will, that are like integrated product suites. That's what they're called. And so, you got your iPhone and they got the computer and they got the iPad and they got all the things that go with that. They got the regular computers, the power books, and then they got the desktops. Then they got the service plans that go with them, right? So they want this everything is integrated. It's a suite of products. And they're thinking about expansion of their customer base. So a lot of people that have their phone have their laptop, right? And not everybody, but a lot of people that buy their laptop buy their phone. They look, and then a lot of people have their iPad, right? So it's just a way that you can kind of start thinking and planning. These are the stages that you go through in a relationship. This is what you look for. This is how you make decisions about who to partner with, because there's this expansion stage. And then you need to kind of think about, what do I want? In a relationship, if I'm going to build a relationship with this partner, what is the expansion stage going to look like? You may not know exactly, but you're going to have some idea. So then it becomes this, you're asking questions, probing. What is the future? What more could we do ahead of time? Like planning. And so then it becomes exciting. It's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're building the value of our relationship and we're looking out into the future, how we can both be, it's a win-win now. How can it be a bigger win and a bigger win and a bigger win for both of us, right? And so we're looking internally at both of us and externally out there. And then once the expansion stage, and these overlap, by the way, they're just not like you have the opening and then it's the exploration and then it's the expansion. It's like, no, they overlap. Time is different sometimes as well. Then there's a commitment. Now they committed to purchase. They committed to how long they're going to be. They're committed to give you some business, to come back to you. That's the advanced stage of the relationship. It's more advanced. right? Because they've already built some trust. They've already built and explored that with you, how you handle problems, how you handle when there's a service issue. They know that. So now they're more committed to you in this stage. So they can make a bigger investment. And here the investments at this stage, they're sharing information. So now, because like I'm working with a facility, a sports facility, and their member families. Now they're willing at this stage to share information about their member families with me. Now they have competitors out there, and they're not going to share information with me thinking I'm going to go to their competitors or um, and use that information in a way. Now they're sharing with me to build the value because they trust me at this stage. That's important. And then you kind of think about there at some point relationships end. At some point, a lot of them naturally, but you kind of think about, as much as we don't like to think about the stage, the dissolution stage, it's important just to kind of think about, okay, if we're going to terminate a relationship, what does that look like and why? A lot of people put this in writing, right, in the agreements that they have, but sometimes it's not in writing. And this is then gets into the thing about if a relationship was win-win in the beginning and now it's like they win and I kind of win, but not always. They're not giving me the business that they used to. And then, but they're limiting my ability to reach out to other partners. Is it make sense for me to keep the partnership going? I've had relationships where I'm like, they were giving me 60% and they were taking 40% of the business. And they were running all the operations. And then eventually it was like, oh, I don't think that's as fair anymore because I'm doing most of the work. I want more peace. And you come back, you agree to review things. That's part of the agreement. And then in the reviewing, they're not happy to give you more money, give you a higher percentage. Boom, relationship disconnected, disillusioned. You could still be friends, right? But the business relationship is done, right? There might be other pieces in there, or there might not. And why would you dissolve a relationship like that? Poor performance, right? Clash in culture. That happens a lot. All of a sudden, you realize you got with this partner, and they're all very, friendly in the beginning, and then all of a sudden, you see some of the business dealings that they do with other people, and you're like, I don't know if I want to be associated with them anymore. They're going to, the image is not as what I thought it was. A change in needs, right? A lot of times it's needs, like personal relationships too, change in needs. And so you got to kind of think about that, In the beginning, maybe they wanted is a lot of partners, and now you're to the point where it's like, I've outgrown that. I want specific partners that do more. And sometimes there's loss investments, and sure, I've had a partner where I ponied up some money up front for part of the business, a franchise, and it didn't work out. After a while, after a couple of years, it wasn't the business side wasn't doing what it said it was going to do. Lost investment money, lost time. You learn, right? You learn. All partnerships are not going to work out. Tell you right now. We know that. We don't want to look at that sometimes, but they're just not. They don't all last forever. Sometimes they last a long time. Sometimes they last not a long time, right? Um, but it's important to kind of think about these foundations, right? If we're building successful partnerships and relationships, keys, right? So I like this. This is a really good kind of thing to think about. Foundations. I like foundation structure. Mutual trust. A successful relationship has mutual trust, right? Open communication back and forth. You could see when one of these get broken, what happens to the relationship, right? Common goals. Doesn't mean that everybody has the same goals, but they're common. They're in the same ballpark, right? Commitment. The commitment to both gaining something in the relationship. And there's organizational support, right? They're willing to help you build your business. You're willing to help them build their business. That's what partners do. So they're willing to provide information in a certain way and vice versa. Organizational support, right? Um, so let's key in on a couple of these. Again, like I said, we're gonna not have time to go through this entire chapter, but a good chunk of it. Mutual trust. What is that based on? Again, these are the pillars, right? If these are the pillars of a foundation of a successful relationship, a partnership, buyer seller, um, company, a boss, hires you. It's the same thing, right? Um, Relationship. So mutual trust, dependability. Can they count on you? And here's the thing here, specifically in sales, perception that the salesperson, that the product you have and your company you represent you'll live up to the promises you make. That's dependability, right? Um, it's perception. It really is perception. It's a mindset because you may be dependable and they might not think you are because you messed up one time. Maybe they were expecting 100% perfect, and so maybe the product didn't work as well one time. You're not dependable. Boom. But mutual trust, they're looking for that. Um, and how do you get that, right? How do you get that? So obviously, this is what we're trying to build in a relationship at the beginning stages. You want to be known as dependable, right? The dependable employee, dependable salesperson, dependable whomever, they can count on you, right? That's an important category, characteristic. And so, how do you get that as a salesperson? Third party references, successful customers before. You demo your product, you show them what it is, you show them what it does. Wow. You give them a tour of your facility. If you can, right? People do that, plan tours. My friend who sells the big um, multiple hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars for these machines that cut granite, that do all the engineering of the granite. Um, they have they fly in customers, prospects, um, to give them a tour. New customers. Here you can see how we make, how we service the machinery. That can help them when knowing, okay, here are the pieces that wear out. Look for some of these. Not no product that you buy is not going to have anything that doesn't wear out eventually. So they can be more um, aware of potential issues down the road. That's a service. Shows you're dependable. Other types of presentations you can give them. Maybe once a year you give them a presentation on best practices for keeping the machines working well. Maybe you offer different kinds of a newsletter. Here's what other people are doing with their machinery. Here's how they're servicing it. You know what? You're using it to cut granite. You can also use it to cut tile. And here's how you do that, a different use, right? To show your dependability, certainly your experience and your training. You talk that up, right? Been on the job for how long? Obviously, if you're very new, think about this. You've just been hired by an employer. You're building dependability. They might know of you and things you've done, but until they see you, so you're building the experience that you're reliable, dependable, right? Sure, they checked your references. They saw what you've done in the past, who you worked for. But until they see it for themselves, the trust isn't fully there. So that's what it allows you to do. And then you assume the buyer, you assume it grows in time, right? Of course it does, hopefully. Um, Other things, competence. You got to know the customer, your product, the industry, and the competition. If you're building this relationship, this partnership, to build mutual trust, you got to be competent. You got to understand, the industry. I have a relationship with a partner, a facility, a sports facility. They have lots of member families. I got to understand who are their competitors. I got to understand what's happening in the global industry of the sport that they're in. Maybe there was a big deal happening in terms of, a big merger of manufacturers in the industry. How does that impact our relationship? Right. So there's lots of pieces to building this trust, dependability, competence. Certainly, another thing to think about here: customer orientation, honesty, likability. So you're building trust, right? Do I put their needs first? Meaning that, yeah, I want to make the sale, and yeah, I want to get a reorder, but maybe that their their transportation department, they've had some trouble with their trucks, and because of that, they can't bring in as much product as they initially thought. You keep pushing. Well, you said you were going to bring in, all these suits or all these paint, and you're not doing it, and you keep pushing them, and then you realize they can trust you. You can trust them, right? That's a relationship both ways. So they're stressing different points here. You know what? We've had problem with our trucks. We need to get that fixed, and then we'll bring in more of your paint. Okay. So they're being truthful with you, vice versa. Liked, this isn't always, there's a degree here. You don't have to be like the most liked and outgoing, and they think of you and they just like go, he's the most amazing. That's wonderful. But you want to have a friendly manner. You want it not be painful to deal with you. And I've had this, happen. It's like, and I know some salespeople that have been in certain businesses where, they're not very well liked, not by everybody. And so those that don't like them, how is it going to build the trust and the value? How's it going to be a long-term value? But you can influence that with how you communicate, right? And in listening, in talking, in sending them a note afterwards. Thank you so much for your business. I appreciate it. Giving more value than they anticipated in the beginning, right? So let's finish this little piece here about open communication, then we'll be done for today. Before I close, know this: we're meeting on Saturday. The next meeting, somebody had asked me, but the next meeting, we're going to be meeting a week from Tuesday. We're going back on the Tuesday schedule for the next 2 Tuesdays. So that is the 28th of March. Okay, we're skipping this coming Tuesday. 28th and April 4th. If it's not already in Microsoft Teams in the calendar, I'll make sure it is by the end of today. I didn't have a chance to check that just to make sure those dates are there. But so the Tuesday schedule, 28th, April 4th. Also know, again, assignment 2 is there. You have another couple of weeks to get to that. I did post a very short quiz for chapter 12. That's up there. Chapter 12, again, was about negotiation. I didn't want to get it up there till we finished the chapter. I didn't feel that was fair. So now it's I posted it yesterday. Sorry, a day ahead, but I don't think anybody did it yet. And so just a heads up, because of the way the grading and the point system works at Windsor, there'll only be one more quiz that I post up. Assignment 2 is the last assignment, just so you know. And then we'll have the final exam the last week. That'll be 100 points. Just kind of giving you a heads up on all that stuff. All right, so let's talk about open communication, and we can be done here. Key building block, right? We know this. open communication. If it's not, and one party feels a little bit cheated, that's going to weigh in on the relationship, right? So just kind of start thinking about, do we have an open communication? It doesn't have to be open 100% of the time, all the time, but is it open in a way where if there was a problem happening, somebody could ask a question, feed that information into somewhere that it would get looked at. Okay. And here's the difference in communication in successful strategic partnerships is think about the difference between the two. One is relational, one is strategic. Again, there's a blend. A lot of them are both. A lot of them start as strategic, become relational. And relational partnerships hopefully have a little bit of strategy to them. So it's not all one or the other. But communication between the buyer and the seller goes through the salesperson if it's relationship. Absolutely. That's the point of contact. That's who you trust the most, right? If it's strategic, it goes through between the buyer and the seller directly. It may not touch the salesperson. Company to company. Strategic partnership could be like a business to business. It may just not go through the salesperson. So just kind of think about that. It could, but it doesn't. And what happens is this reduce the you think about, as we said, one of the downfalls of a group negotiation, too many people, take too long, too many objections raised. That deals with this. And this is why open communication is important and why in a strategic partnership, a lot of times the communications is buyer and seller directly, bypassing the salesperson, because it reduces how many people are talking and potential conflict. Okay? It just kind of simplifies things. It's less layers of people to talk to. A lot of companies have a lot of layers of management, and some are necessary, some aren't. School systems have lots of layers of management and people. And are they all necessary? They think they are, but they could probably be more efficient. So pulling out some of the layers allows for more efficiency. Okay? That's what I have. We're going to stop here. And then we're going to talk about common goals and other pieces about building the relationship and when they don't work out, what do we do in terms of dissolving them. All right. So again, we'll finish up chapter 13 a week from Tuesday on the 28th of March. I'll make sure that's in the team's calendar. Assignment number 2 is ready. Quiz for chapter 12 is ready. There's still a number of people that I know have not done quizzes from previous chapters. Those are still up, but make sure you get them done because they're probably not going to be up for that much longer. All right, that's all I have for you. Enjoy the rest of your evening, your day, and I'll see everybody back on the 28th of March, a week from Tuesday. All right, thank you all. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Professor.
Professor.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.